The year was 1099, and the city of Jerusalem bled under the weight of Crusader steel. The First Crusade had ended with rivers of blood staining the holy streets, where the cries of the dying mingled with the songs of priests lifting the cross high above the carnage. It was a victory born of brutality, a triumph wrapped in both sanctity and sin. Pilgrims from across Christendom flocked to the Holy Land, their hearts burning with devotion, yet their bodies trembling with fear. For the deserts were treacherous, the roads swarming with bandits, and every journey to the Holy Sepulchre could easily turn into a final pilgrimage. Amid this chaos, a small band of knights emerged, not for glory nor for plunder, but for a vow. They were men hardened by war, their hands stained with blood, yet their souls drawn toward something higher. United by a vision, they swore to protect the helpless pilgrims who dared to walk the perilous roads of the Holy Land. With sword and shield, they pledged to fight not only for their lives, but for the souls of strangers who carried nothing but faith. Their leader, a nobleman named Hugues de Payens, carried the weight of this vision like a sacred fire. Alongside 8 companions, he forged a brotherhood that would come to be known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Their title was long, but their purpose was clear. They were to be the guardians of the road to Jerusalem, warriors of God's will in a land where death lurked behind every stone. They had no wealth to call their own, no golden banners to wave. Their quarters were humble, a wing of the Temple Mount itself, ancient stones said to rest upon the ruins of King Solomon's temple. From those walls, so steeped in legend, their name was born: the Knights of the Temple, the Templars. It was a name that would echo through centuries, stirring both reverence and fear. The world looked upon them with suspicion at first. Who were these men, dressed not in velvet but in plain robes, who lived without wives, without coin, without comforts? Yet in their austerity lay their power. Each vow they took, poverty, chastity, obedience, burned away the weakness of ordinary men, binding them into something unyielding. They were more than knights. They were instruments. They were blades sharpened by prayer, forged in fire, and quenched in faith. Jerusalem at night whispered with stories of them. Pilgrims spoke of their courage, of how they fought like lions against ambushes, how they would ride into the teeth of danger with no thought for their lives. In every tavern and market, tales of these strange warrior monks spread. To the devout, they were angels in armor. To the fearful, they were zealots cloaked in shadows. But to their enemies, they were something far worse: an unbreakable wall of steel, wielding faith as their deadliest weapon. The soil of the Holy Land drank deeply of blood, and the Templars added their share. Yet behind each sword thrust lay not the hunger for conquest, but the vow of protection. It was a paradox: monks who killed, killers who prayed. And it was in this paradox that their legend began to grow. As the sun set behind the domes of Jerusalem, painting the sky in hues of fire, the Templars knelt in silence. The world around them trembled with violence, kingdoms clashed, and the faithful perished. But within those walls of stone, in the shadow of the ancient temple, a new order was born, an order that would rise from obscurity to dominate the stage of history. And though none could know it then, their oath, whispered in the dust of Jerusalem, would one day bring them unimaginable glory and unfathomable doom. The dawn of the Templar Order wasn't written in gold, but etched in silence, discipline, and chains of sacred duty. When a knight entered their ranks, he did not gain power, he surrendered it. Before the eyes of his brothers, before the crucifix that loomed over the dim-lit chapel, he bent his knee and placed his sword upon the altar. And then came the words, words that bound him tighter than iron shackles. A vow of poverty, a vow of chastity, and a vow of obedience. In that moment, he ceased to belong to himself. He became the property of God. Poverty meant more than giving up wealth. It meant stripping away all comforts of nobility. No jewels, no fine silks, not even the right to claim spoils of war. A Templar owned nothing but his weapons and his faith. When he died, even his horse and armor returned to the order. To the outside world, this humility inspired awe. Yet within their hearts, it demanded a brutal sacrifice. For knights raised on pride and inheritance, to abandon their lineage was a death of another kind. Chastity cut deeper still. To renounce the love of women, to live without wife or heir, was to deny the very bloodlines that defined medieval nobility. The Templar gave his body to no mortal embrace. It belonged wholly to Christ. In the lonely hours of night, far from the touch of warmth, this vow turned into a battlefield of its own. Desire warring against duty, temptation lurking like an unseen enemy. Yet each man who resisted carved his soul into something harder, sharper. Obedience was the final chain, and perhaps the heaviest. Every Templar surrendered his will to the Grand Master and, above him, to the will of God as interpreted by the order. No question, no hesitation, no defiance. When commanded to charge, he charged. When told to die, he died. Obedience transformed them from men into a single organism, a brotherhood that struck as one blade, without doubt or mercy. The rule of the Templars, drafted under the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux, codified these vows into iron law. It forbade vanity, outlawed idleness, and demanded humility in every act. Meals were taken in silence, with prayers in place of conversation. They slept, clothed, ready at any hour for the trumpet of battle. Their white mantles, stark as winter snow, bore the crimson cross, a symbol both of sacrifice and unrelenting war. To wear it was both privilege and burden, for it proclaimed to the world that they were no longer men of flesh, but knights of eternity. To outsiders, these vows made the Templars seem inhuman, as if they had carved away their very souls to become something otherworldly. But within the order, these vows forged an unshakable brotherhood. Each knight knew that his comrade beside him was bound by the same chains, scarred by the same sacrifices, and devoted to the same God. In the furnace of this shared discipline, loyalty was no longer a choice, it was inevitable. And so, as the years passed, the Knights of the Temple ceased to be just guardians of pilgrims. They became something more, a disciplined army, purified by vows, strengthened by unity, and feared for their absolute devotion. Their code was their weapon, sharper than steel, harder than stone. In a world where kings could be swayed, nobles could betray, and priests could be corrupted, the Templars appeared immovable, incorruptible. But vows, like chains, can weigh heavy. Behind the silence of the dining halls, behind the stoic masks of battle, each knight carried a storm within. For to bind the human spirit so tightly was to court both greatness and collapse. The vows that lifted the Templars above other men would one day drag them into shadows darker than death. The Holy Land was a crucible of faith and fire, and the Templars were its steel. When their trumpets sounded, they did not march like common soldiers. They thundered forward as one, a storm of hooves and iron. Dust rose in clouds behind them, sunlight glinting off lances lowered in perfect formation. To face them was to stare into the maw of judgment itself, for the Knights of the Temple fought not for land or gold, but under the banner of God. and in their conviction, they became more terrifying than any mortal foe. On the fields of battle, their discipline was unmatched. Where other knights broke rank in pursuit of glory, the Templars held fast. They advanced as a wall, shields locked, their white mantles marked with blood yet unyielding. Chronicles tell of their charges splitting enemy lines like a blade through parchment. Muslim warriors came to know them well, men who did not retreat, men who would fight until every last drop of their lifeblood soaked the desert sand. To the Saracens, they were lions in armor, possessed by an unholy resolve. But glory was purchased at a brutal cost. The Templar oath forbade retreat unless outnumbered 3-1, and even then, their commanders often chose defiance over surrender. It was said that a single company of Templars could hold the line long enough for entire armies to escape, sacrificing themselves in a storm of arrows and blades. To die as a Templar wasn't failure, it was victory of the soul. Their deaths became legends, their corpses sermons of steel and faith. At Hattin in 1187, the Templars faced their greatest trial. Surrounded by the armies of Saladin, parched under a merciless sun, they fought with a fury that shook the earth. Yet even their iron discipline could not withstand the tide. When the Christian army broke, the Templars stood their ground, fighting until they were dragged down one by one. Captured alive, many were offered a chance at life if they renounced Christ. Not a single Templar yielded. They were executed in rows, their blood soaking the dust, their silence louder than any battle cry. Such stories spread across Christendom like wildfire. To the faithful, these martyrs were proof of God's hand upon the order. Pilgrims whispered their names in prayers, bards sang their sacrifices in candle-lit halls, and nobles sent their sons to join their ranks. The Templars became more than warriors. They became symbols, vessels of holy courage in a world that seemed to crumble with each lost fortress. And yet, war hardened them. In the clash of steel and the screams of dying men, mercy was a rare luxury. They gave no quarter and expected none in return. The Templar's sword wasn't dulled by pity, for pity could undo an entire campaign. To their enemies, they seemed merciless, relentless, an army of fanatics whose humanity had been burned away by faith. But to themselves, each strike of the blade was prayer, each battle a liturgy of blood. It was on these battlefields that the Order forged its indomitable reputation. They were not invincible, far from it, but their willingness to fight beyond reason, to die beyond hope, made them seem unstoppable. In a world ruled by fragile alliances and treacherous kings, the Templars were a constant, unshakable, incorruptible, and eternal in their mission. The Holy Land would never cease to demand blood, and the Templars gave it freely, each battle a coin paid into the treasury of heaven, each scar a testament to their oath. But the fires of war did more than forge their legend. They also forged envy, suspicion, and fear. And soon, the Order would discover that the deadliest enemies were not always across the desert, but seated upon thrones far closer to home. War had forged their name, but coin built their empire. The Templars, born as humble guardians of pilgrims, soon discovered that swords alone could not hold the Holy Land. Roads needed fortifications, armies needed provisions, and pilgrims, those frail souls braving the deserts, needed safety beyond steel. And so the Order turned its discipline toward a quieter conquest, one not of battlefields but of balance sheets, ledgers, and sealed contracts. It began innocently enough. A pilgrim setting out for Jerusalem would entrust his wealth to a Templar commandery in Paris or London. In return, he would receive a parchment marked with the Red Cross and sealed in wax. With that slip of paper, he could draw funds at any Templar house along the road, whether in Rome, Venice, or Acre. It was a system so ingenious, so secure, that it was nothing less than the birth of modern banking. The pilgrim traveled unburdened by gold, safe from robbers, while the order grew fat on the currents of coin that flowed through its coffers. But what began as service became dominion. Kings, too, saw the value of Templar vaults. They deposited their treasures for safekeeping, borrowed sums to finance their wars, and pledged lands as collateral. Soon, the order held not only money, but influence. Quiet, invisible influence, more potent than any army. The white-mantled knights became landlords, bankers, and tax collectors. Their castles dotted the landscapes of Europe, not only as fortresses of stone, but as fortresses of credit. Their wealth, however, did not glitter in the open. Templar rule demanded simplicity. No knight wore gold, no feast overflowed with excess. Yet behind the austere walls of their commanderies lay reserves of staggering magnitude. Gold piled high, lands stretching across kingdoms, entire fleets under their control. They financed kings and crowned crusades, moving coin across Christendom with a speed and efficiency that no monarch could rival. To the common folk, this mystery only deepened their aura. The poor saw humble monks in white cloaks, men who lived without wives or wealth. But whispers spread. Whispers of secret treasuries buried beneath Temple Mount, of chests carried under cover of night, of vaults that no king had ever dared to breach. Their secrecy fed imagination, and imagination birthed fear. In courts and taverns, tongues wagged. Were the Templars truly servants of Christ, or had they become merchants hiding behind a cross? Some said they sought not only gold, but relics, artifacts of divine power that would grant them authority over kings and popes alike. Others whispered of forbidden rites, of meetings in dark halls where vows of poverty were mocked by treasures gleaming in shadow. Yet for decades, their influence only grew. Monarchs borrowed from them, merchants relied upon them, and even the Pope himself blessed their wealth. The Templars had become a kingdom within kingdoms, a power without a crown, an empire without a throne. And with every coin that passed through their hands, they wove a web of loyalty and dependence that even the mightiest rulers could not easily cut. But power, whether in steel or in silver, breeds envy. Kings resented owing debts to monks who bore no titles. Nobles whispered against their growing estates. And within the church itself, unease stirred at the sight of an order whose wealth rivaled Rome's. The Templars had become too rich, too secretive, too indispensable. And in the shadows of their vaults, their downfall was already being written, not by their enemies on the battlefield, but by those who once called themselves allies. Wealth and war were only part of the Templars' story. What truly bound their name to eternity was not gold nor blood, but mystery. From their earliest days on the Temple Mount, rumors swirled like desert winds. Had they uncovered secrets buried beneath Solomon's temple? Did their long nights of prayer hide something darker? Rituals, relics, forbidden truths too great for mortal eyes? The answers were shrouded in silence, and silence gave birth to legend. Pilgrims whispered of relics guarded in their vaults, the Holy Grail, the cup said to have caught the blood of Christ at Calvary, the spear of destiny that pierced his side, even the lost Ark of the Covenant, pulsing with divine fire. No chronicler could confirm such treasures, yet their absence from history seemed to demand an explanation. Who better than the Templars, keepers of secrets and guardians of God's holy ground, to possess them? Some claimed the order's power sprang not from coin, but from these relics. How else could a few hundred knights stand against armies of thousands? How else could their discipline hold so unshakably? To the faithful, the relics explained their victories. To the suspicious, they proved the Templars trafficked in sorcery, their vows little more than masks for darker pursuits. Even their initiation rites were cloaked in rumor. A recruit, it was said, might be asked to spit upon the cross, to deny Christ aloud, testing his loyalty through blasphemy. Others whispered of secret kisses on the mouth, the navel, even the base of the spine, symbols of unity twisted by fearful minds into proof of perversion. Were these truths or inventions of envious tongues? No outsider could know, for the Templars revealed nothing. Their silence was both their shield and their curse. Bernard of Clairvaux had once praised them as fearless knights of Christ, men who bore a sword with one hand and a prayer with the other. Yet centuries later, poets and mystics recast them in stranger light, seekers of hidden wisdom, guardians of ancient truths carried from Jerusalem to Europe in secret caravans. Some claimed they communed with angels, others that they bowed before idols, mysterious heads of silver or stone said to whisper prophecies. Whether truth or fabrication, the effect was the same. The Templars ceased to be merely men. They became symbols. To some, saints of a militant faith. To others, shadows striding across history, their white mantles stained not only with blood, but with occult knowledge. The very ambiguity gave them power, for what cannot be proven cannot be destroyed. Yet legends are double-edged swords. The Grail, the Ark, the hidden treasures, these tales made the Templars larger than life, but also painted targets on their backs. For kings and priests alike, suspicion grew. If the Templars truly held relics of divine power, then their influence rivaled the Church itself. If they practiced secret rites, then they had betrayed Christ. And if they carried hidden treasure, then greed alone demanded their downfall. But the knights, bound by silence, neither confirmed nor denied. They fought their wars, they counted their coin, they rode across deserts with the cross blazing on their chests, and let the world whisper. And with each whisper, their myth grew, until no man could tell where history ended and legend began. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had stood unshaken, their legend towering over kings and kingdoms alike. But legends inspire fear, and power invites envy. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Knights of the Temple had amassed not only immense wealth, but also a network of influence that spanned all Christendom. They were bankers, landholders, guardians of treasures real and imagined. To pilgrims, they were protectors. To kings, they had become creditors. And to one king in particular, Philip IV of France, they were shackles he longed to break. Philip, known as the Fair, was neither kind nor just. His coffers drained by endless wars and extravagance, he found himself deep in debt to the Templar order. Each coin owed was a chain on his pride, each loan a reminder of their power over him. To free himself, Philip needed more than repayment. He needed their destruction. And in his ambition, he found an unlikely accomplice. Pope Clement IV. Clement, newly enthroned in Avignon under Philip's shadow, was weak, malleable, and beholden to the French crown. The papacy, long the supreme authority in Christendom, had become a pawn in the king's hand. And with the Pope's complicity, Philip set his snare. He whispered of heresy, of blasphemous rites and hidden idols, of men who had betrayed the very faith they claimed to protect. The silence of the Templars, once their strength, became their doom, for they would not lower themselves to refute rumor with protest. The chosen day was Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that would forever brand itself into superstition. At dawn, across France, the trap was sprung. Templar houses were stormed, knights dragged from their beds in chains, their treasures seized. Accusations poured forth like venom that they spat upon the cross, worshipped a demonic idol called Baphomet, committed unspeakable sins in their secret rites. The charges were as fantastical as they were damning. Philip's motives were clear to those who looked closely. Gold filled his treasuries as Templar wealth was confiscated. Enemies of the order, long cowed by their power, now joined in the chorus of condemnation. And the Pope, bound by fear and obligation, ratified the charges. Christendom, once defended by the Templars' swords, now turned against them with unholy fervor. The arrests marked not only the fall of men, but the fall of a myth. The mighty warriors who had stood unflinching on desert sands were shackled like criminals. Their fortresses, once bastions of faith, became prisons. And yet, even in captivity, the Templars carried themselves with a dignity that defied their accusers. Torturers demanded confessions, and under fire and blade, many broke, their forced words feeding the narrative of guilt. But others held firm, silent to the end, choosing death over dishonor. The world watched in disbelief. Was this justice or treachery cloaked in piety? Some whispered that Philip's accusations were smoke hiding his greed, that the Templars' only crime was wealth too great for a king's envy. But once the Pope spoke, doubt mattered little. The Church itself, which had once sanctified their order, now sealed their fate. Thus the fall of the Templars began not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power, not with the clash of steel, but with the scratching of quills upon parchment. Their greatest enemies were not Saracen warriors across the desert, but kings who owed them coin and priests who envied their influence. In that betrayal lay a lesson carved in history. The mightiest sword can be broken not by steel, but by politics. The once glorious order of the Temple had been cast from the heights of reverence into the depths of suspicion. Yet their story was far from over. For what began with accusations would soon end in fire. And in fire, their legend would blaze brighter than ever. Paris, March 1314. The chill of early spring clung to the city, but in the shadow of Notre Dame, the air was thick with smoke and dread. Crowds pressed together along the banks of the Seine, their murmurs rising into the gray sky as two figures were led forward in chains. At their head walked Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, his once proud bearing reduced to the gait of an old man weighed down not by years, but by betrayal. His mantle was gone, his sword broken, yet his eyes still burned with the fire of defiance. For 7 long years, he and his brothers had endured the torments of Philip's Inquisition. Torture racks had wrenched confessions from their lips, words spat out through screams of agony only to be retracted when the pain subsided. Again and again, they proclaimed their innocence, no idol, no heresy, no secret rites of damnation. But truth mattered little. Philip needed guilt, and Clement gave it to him. Now the end had come, not in battle, but in chains before the jeering crowd of Paris. The pyre was raised high, logs stacked like the bones of 100 martyrs waiting to ignite. As the executioner bound him to the stake, de Molay raised his voice, not to the king, not to the mob, but to heaven itself. Witnesses claimed his words carried over the Seine like thunder. God knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon misfortune shall fall upon those who condemn us unjustly. It was no mere cry of defiance. It was a curse upon Philip, upon Clement, upon all who had betrayed the temple. Flames licked the wood, crackling as smoke billowed skyward. The crowd fell into a hush, as if sensing the gravity of what unfolded. The fire roared, wrapping the Grand Master in a cloak of agony. Yet even as the flames consumed him, Jacques de Molay did not scream. He stood firm, a silhouette of steel and spirit, until at last his body crumbled into ash. In that moment, the man died, but the legend was born. And the curse, the curse, seemed to strike with unholy precision. Within a month, Pope Clement XIII was dead, his body wasted by illness. Before the year had ended, Philip IV himself collapsed suddenly from a stroke, his reign snuffed out like a candle in the wind. His heirs followed swiftly, dying in turn, leaving France's royal line in chaos. Chroniclers whispered that the Grand Master's words had carried to heaven, that God himself had avenged the order. Whether truth or coincidence, the tale spread like wildfire, sealing the Templars' fate not as criminals but as martyrs of injustice. The flames that rose in Paris did more than consume men. They ignited centuries of speculation. What secrets had the Templars taken to the grave? What treasures had vanished with their fall? The curse of de Molay echoed through the ages, feeding the idea that the order was never truly destroyed, that in fire and ashes it had only slipped into shadow, waiting. For kings and popes, the Templars were gone, their lands seized, their wealth scattered, their order disbanded by papal decree. But among the people, among the whispered legends, they remained. In the smoke of that pyre, the Templars passed from history into myth, and myths, unlike men, do not burn. They endure. The flames of Paris may have consumed Jacques de Molay, but they did not consume the order. Though kings and popes declared the Templars dead, whispers told another tale, of secrets smuggled across borders, of treasures spirited away under cover of night, of knights who vanished into exile only to re-emerge as shadows behind thrones. The ashes of the temple gave rise not to silence, but to mystery. The question burned through Europe. What had become of the Templar treasure? Chroniclers had long noted the immense wealth of the order. Gold piled high in Paris, relics said to rest beneath the Temple Mount, ships sailing the Mediterranean heavy with coin and cargo. Yet when Philip's men stormed the Templar houses, they found little. Vaults were empty, ledgers bare. Some said that in the weeks before the arrests, convoys slipped out of Paris by night, carrying the treasure to secret ports. Others claimed entire fleets vanished from La Rochelle, sailing into the Atlantic, never to be seen again. Did they scatter to Scotland? To Portugal? Or did they chase some mythic horizon, carrying with them relics beyond imagination? In Scotland, the rumors grew roots. There, under King Robert the Bruce, excommunicated by Rome and desperate for allies, some claimed the Templars found sanctuary. On the fields of Bannockburn in 1314, when Bruce's ragged army faced English might, legends tell of mysterious horsemen clad in white who charged from the mist, breaking the enemy lines. Whether phantom or flesh, the story endured, binding the Templars to Scotland's triumph. In Portugal, the order took on a new guise. Suppressed by papal decree, they were reborn as the Knights of Christ, carrying the same vows, the same discipline, but under a different name. Their red cross, once feared on desert sands, would later adorn the sails of caravels that charted the unknown seas, guiding Portugal into the age of discovery. The Templar spirit had not died. It had simply changed its banner. And yet, for every tale of survival, there were darker whispers. Some spoke of Templars burrowing into the fabric of secret societies, their rituals preserved in shadows. Others believed they became the architects of hidden brotherhoods, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the silent orders that would emerge centuries later, claiming descent from the knights who had defied kings. The truth remained elusive, but the allure of the unknown made the Templars immortal. Even their supposed curse lingered in European memory. Whenever disaster struck the French crown, whenever papal authority trembled, people recalled the Grand Master's fiery words. Was it divine judgment, or the long hand of an order that had never truly perished? Fear and fascination twisted together, ensuring that the name of the Templars would never be forgotten. For all their relics, their riches, and their power, the greatest treasure of the Templars was their legend. By vanishing into mystery, they became larger than history itself. Their enemies had stripped them of land and life, but in doing so, they had set them free, from the confines of fact into the boundless realm of myth. The order was gone, yet it was everywhere, in stories told by firesides, in the symbols etched into stone, in the quiet terror of rulers who wondered if the knights might someday return. And perhaps, in some hidden chapel, in some forgotten stronghold, a brotherhood still knelt in silence, bound by ancient vows, waiting for the moment to rise once more. The fall of the Templars should have ended their story, burying them as just another relic of medieval strife. Yet, paradoxically, it was in their destruction that they achieved immortality. For while kings seized their lands and popes disbanded their order, no decree could silence the power of myth. From the ashes of Jacques de Molay's pyre, the Knights Templar rose anew, not as warriors of flesh, but as legends carved into the imagination of generations to come. In the centuries that followed, writers and poets began to weave the Templars into their tales. Some painted them as martyrs, betrayed by a corrupt king and a cowardly pope. Others cast them as seekers of forbidden wisdom, guardians of relics that could alter the fate of nations. In the hands of troubadours and chroniclers, the Templars ceased to be men. They became symbols, embodiments of faith and betrayal, loyalty and secrecy. Their story was retold so many times that fact and fiction blurred, leaving only an immortal legend. The Renaissance brought with it a hunger for mysteries of the past, and the Templars stood as a perfect vessel. Artists depicted them with crosses blazing upon their mantles, stoic and eternal. Historians debated their true role, while alchemists and mystics whispered of their hidden knowledge. Secret societies of the Enlightenment claimed them as spiritual forebears, draping their rituals with echoes of Templar vows. Whether truth or invention mattered little. What mattered was the aura of power their name invoked. As Europe entered the modern age, the Templars marched with it, no longer on horses into battlefields, but upon the pages of novels and the stages of plays. Sir Walter Scott resurrected them in Ivanhoe, casting them as both noble and corrupt, holy and dangerous. Later, Romantic poets wrapped them in mystery, while 19th-century historians re-examined their downfall with fresh suspicion of royal treachery. Each retelling added new layers, transforming the order into a mirror for the fears and desires of every age. In the 20th and 21st centuries, their legend exploded into popular culture. From conspiracy theories about hidden treasures beneath the Temple Mount to tales of secret bloodlines tied to Christ himself, the Templars became the beating heart of modern myth. They stood at the center of best-selling novels, blockbuster films, and whispered theories about world domination. Their red cross adorned not only dusty chronicles, but the glossy covers of thrillers and the glowing screens of cinema. What made their story so enduring was not simply mystery, but duality. To some, they were saints, warriors of God, crushed unjustly by corrupt rulers. To others, they were shadows, fanatics or sorcerers, their silence proof of secrets too dark to reveal. This paradox gave them life, for myths thrive not on certainty, but on questions left unanswered. The irony was stark. Philip and Clement had sought to erase the Templars, yet in doing so, they immortalized them. By burning their leaders, they lit a flame that history could never extinguish. Each century fanned the embers, reshaping the order into whatever the world needed it to be. Protectors, villains, martyrs, conspirators. Always present, never proven, their absence was their greatest power. Thus, from ashes, they became eternal. The Knights Templar no longer rode through the deserts of Palestine or guarded the roads to Jerusalem. Instead, they galloped through the dreams and nightmares of humanity, forever draped in white mantles marked with crimson crosses, forever straddling the line between truth and legend. And in that space, in the silence where certainty dies and wonder is born, the Templars achieved a victory greater than any crusade. The story of the Knights Templar ends where it began, in the tension between history and faith, between the known and the unknown. Were they holy warriors, defenders of Christendom who paid the ultimate price for their loyalty? Or were they pawns of kings, consumed by the very wealth and power they once renounced? The truth, like the sands of Jerusalem, slips through the fingers. Yet it is in that ambiguity that their enchantment lies. What we know is clear enough. They were born from blood, the crucible of the First Crusade, forged by the suffering of pilgrims and sanctified by vows as harsh as the deserts they patrolled. They fought with courage, often beyond reason, and in their discipline they created an army unlike any the world had seen. They mastered not only the sword, but the quill, building a financial empire that rivaled monarchs. Their downfall came not from enemies on the battlefield, but from betrayal in marble halls, where crowns and mitres weighed heavier than crosses. And yet, what we believe is far murkier. The Grail, the Ark, the hidden treasures, the secret rites, all live not in the record books, but in the imagination. They survive because we want them to, because humanity needs mysteries that stretch beyond the cold facts of history. The Templars became a canvas onto which every age painted its fears and desires. Medieval peasants saw martyrs, Enlightenment thinkers saw conspirators, modern dreamers see guardians of secrets that might reshape the world. Their silence was their most enduring weapon. In never explaining themselves fully, in leaving gaps wide enough for legend to grow, they became immortal. Every unanswered question birthed 1,000 stories. Every rumor became a thread in a tapestry woven over centuries. And as long as questions remain, did they hide treasures? Did they survive in secret? Did they hold truths the Church feared to reveal? The Templars will never truly vanish. What, then, is their legacy? Perhaps not the gold that vanished, nor the castles that crumbled, nor even the blood spilled on deserts and fields. Their true legacy is the enduring power of myth, the ability of a story to outlive its tellers, to grow larger than truth itself. They remind us that history is not only what happened, but what we believe might have happened, what we want to have happened. In that space between fact and faith, the Knights Templar still ride. And so, when we hear the name Templar, we do not picture ashes in Paris or skeletons beneath stone. We see white mantles with crimson crosses, horses thundering toward the horizon, and men who lived and died for a cause greater than themselves. We feel the weight of their vows, the blaze of their downfall, and the chill of their curse echoing through time. They are gone, yet they endure, not as flesh and blood, but as echoes in the collective soul of humanity. The truth of the Templars may be forever beyond our grasp, but enchantment, that is eternal. And as long as we whisper their name, as long as we tell their story by firelight and page, the Knights of the Temple will never be forgotten. They remain both saints and shadows, heroes and heretics, guardians and ghosts. That is their power. That is their immortality.